Hello, I'm Chris Hines, Technical Manager for Borrelstone Products, and today I'd like to cover a few technical aspects that apply to cultured stone and pro stone. We're going to talk about our industry trade association and some changes that have happened there. We're going to talk about some ASTM standards development that will impact you, some building code changes. We'll touch on a few innovative systems, and we'll finish with some hot topics. Our trade association, MVMA, Masonry Veneer Manufacturers Association, is actually a committee now under the NCMA, the National Concrete Masonry Association. We started as MVMA in 2006, and it was actually under a trade association management group called the Kellen Associate. In 2013, we left Kellen and joined NCMA. On this slide, there is a hot link for anyone who follows the slide information afterwards, where you can go directly to the NCMA website, and you'll see some things like this. This is a section of some of their white papers and topics. These are developing, improving, and more being added every day. We start with the Manufacturer Veneer Installation Guide. This is the 4th edition. There's topics on control joints. There's topics related to the California Building Code. The specific white paper is on the 2007 version of that code. We've got technical bulletins on water penetration, both with and without rain screen installations, and some FAQs. All of this is on the NCMA website. Their regular task, NCMA, is to work on standards development, to work on code changes, and to keep up on industry. They also do some testing, as NCMA has their own research laboratory. In the works right now, they're trying to understand bond characteristics and things that can be done to improve bond. They work on installation technical training as well, and have also helped with some continuous installation information. Most recently, the lion's share of the research is focused on something called LDS, linear drying shrinkage, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. So even though our industry is almost 60 years old, we are still growing up, and there are some changes in play that will be impacting you soon. For those of you who remember a recent volcano eruption in Hawaii, this is a shot from there. The point I'm trying to make here is that building code changes and standards take quite a while before they impact the end user of the product, but once they do, it's a big impact. So ASTM, what is ASTM? It's an organization, nonprofit, that develops standards. They can be product standards, testing standards, or installation standards. What is a standard? A standard is basically when you get a group of all the stakeholders together and you develop the wording in such a way that it can only be interpreted one way, and it is developed in a consensus process. What's a consensus process? When you have folks from manufacturing, test laboratories, you have people from academia, you have representation from contractors in the room, and you hash over the words of the document until everyone agrees on their meaning. And that's really what a consensus standard process is. This is a fairly busy slide, but basically what it's trying to do is show you the timeline in the development of building code changes in our industry. So when I started, pre-2000, there were 3 model building codes, and there was an ICC acceptance criteria 51. We'll come back to that in a minute. And in the 2000 editions of the International Residential Code and is an International Building Code, some requirements were pulled from a building code for masonry called ACI 530. That same code in 2003 added just a few words, which you may have heard me say in previous presentation, and a means for drainage. This is what drove many of the changes related to 2 layers of building paper. In 2005 to 2006, we had some interactions with the National Home Builders Association, and I draw a red line through that because it indicates kind of a change in the way folks looked at our industry. In 2006, we formed the Trade Association, and that began to give the industry credibility. And our first efforts were getting all manufacturers on the same page in terms of installation techniques and so on. When you get into the 2009 edition of the building codes, the simple sentence that you have to install per the manufacturer's installation instructions was added to the code. It's a pretty big deal because before that it was difficult to enforce just the manufacturer's installation instructions. In 2012, there was additional language added for clearance requirements. There are still many questions about the clearance requirements for stone to grade and stone to paved surfaces. They are a code requirement and they show up in that edition of the code. In 2015, additional language related to the lath installation was added. In the 2018 code, it's possible that the only references there would be that your product must comply with ASTM C1670 and the installation must comply with ASTM C1780. So I indicated that changes are coming down the pike. But for now, ICC acceptance criteria AC51 is still the governing document. Let's talk about those two ASTM standards for a minute. The first one, ASTM C1670, is the product that governs how you manufacture the product. It defines the minimum requirements at the time of delivery. That's an important concept. There's a section in this standard that addresses all the terminology. There are material requirements. They actually address what you make your product out of. There are sampling requirements. Sometimes you're sampling from concrete mix and sometimes you're sampling stone units for testing. And then the actual physical requirements for those when you test them. Some tests that are done on the concrete mix would be compressive strength, where you must have at least 2100 psi. Freeze thaw, where you're going to go through 50 cycles per a standard called C666, and you'll be allowed a 1.5% mass loss of the product after those cycles. The tests that are done on the units themselves, you look at the dimensional requirements. You look at shear bond, making sure that the product after it's manufactured has the capability to achieve proper bond. Absorption is measured, the density is measured, and then you see in red linear drying shrinkage. Earlier I said I would come back to this, and this is the reason why. So this standard was developed and a linear drying shrinkage requirement was included in the standard that actually applies to block and should not have been used for this particular product. So there are changes underway right now to address the requirements to make it a more appropriate requirement for a wet cast product like ours. There are finish and appearance requirements that deal with surface defects and cracks and imperfections as viewed from 20 feet. This is a standard distance for masonry materials. So I said that AC51 is the current governing document. Let's compare that against the ASTM standard which is coming. So in the ASTM standard, that's a consensus document. We talked about what a consensus document is. AC51 is not. That is ICC creating the requirements by themselves. There's a more aggressive compressive strength requirement in the standard. It's 2100 instead of 1800. More stringent freeze thaw requirements. We're testing to a standard called C666, which was developed for the paving industry. Pavers in a very harsh environment on the ground, whereas our product's on a wall. The AC51 freeze thaw requirements are from a brick standard, which are a little less aggressive. Linear drying shrinkage requirement we talked about, and surface appearance. Let's talk for a second about ASTM C1780. This is the installation standard. This is the first consensus standard. I said that when we formed our trade association, that was the first industry document. This is the first consensus standard around installation. And it's based on and in full agreement with the MVMA installation guide. The idea is it's developed to improve installation and performance. Again, the standard includes terminology, materials, it addresses ambient conditions, surface preparation. The application of the units themselves. This is where the Method A and Method B installation techniques were first written. It talks about pointing and finishing joints. There's a section on cleaning and a section on special applications that includes drainage walls, for example, and the difference between interior and exterior installations. The installation standard takes the shear bond requirement one step further. It actually tests the mortar application you would use in the field. So it's a little different than the shear bond test in the product standard. So in summary, this is a typical path for any new building material. The standards are intended to raise the bar for both customers, for manufacturing, for installers. We need to communicate this information to our customers to make sure they're ready. We will see these changes fall into the building code and then begin to get enforced in your jurisdiction. We'd like to be the market leader in explaining to our customers this stuff is coming.